After the new year, my uncle said to me and my sister, "Girl, don't go to the table." My mother was stunned, then smiled and said, "Yes, yes." She drove my sister and I into the kitchen. I feel wronged because my uncle bullies my family and my mother helps outsiders. My mother slapped me in the face. "What are you thinking? Eat quickly. You can't even take a plate of dishes from here tonight." My dad gave birth to 2 daughters in a row and went to the hospital for ligation. In his words, "I can have one, and I can have 2, and I like children. That's enough. Why don't you have a son to inherit the family business? Their daughters are not dead, so the girl can't get married?" He looked. "It has to be open. The older generation can't think about it." My grandmother cried and asked him to have another son. My dad responded with a smile, turned around and went to the hospital for ligation, and took the report in front of her and said, "You can have a grandson, but your daughter-in-law is really born. That's not mine. Can I guarantee my lifelong colleagues? No matter who my wife belongs, can you be your own grandson?" My grandmother is silent. What he wants is his own grandson, not a wild grandson. This move has made my mother purified for 20 years. In addition, my family is in good condition and a wealthy life, so my mother has developed a beautiful and rich woman. From the moment I can remember, I thought my mother was a woman who didn't worry about anything except drinking tea and shopping. Although I am a little older, I am not as good as my common sense in life. Until a year ago, my uncle from my hometown frequently called my father and urged him to go back to his hometown to celebrate the new year. My dad refused, but this year he brought his family of 4 back to his hometown. At the request of our uncle, we prepared a gift box for tobacco and alcohol to visit our uncle. In the words of my uncle, this is called orderly old and young. The elder brother is the father and grandparents die. My uncle is equivalent to my father's father and must do everything. My dad has always been open-minded and has not returned to his hometown for many years, so he just lets him go with this little thing. Unexpectedly, as soon as he entered my uncle's house, he made a second request: "Let my father pack a top-notch banquet in the best hotel in the local county town as a reunion dinner." This is nothing, after all, it's the Chinese New Year, so it's natural to invite your family to have a meal. The 2 families were lively together. After sitting down at the dining table, my uncle made a third request: "Girl, don't serve the table." My sister and I were both stunned. At this moment, there were only 4 cold cuts on the table, so we were not allowed to serve. The 2 chopsticks we just ate couldn't hold the cold dishes. Is it because of the new year that I was hungry? My mother was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, "Brother is right." My mother drove my sister and I to the kitchen connected to the private room, and then greeted the 2 daughters of my uncle's family to get off the table. Unexpectedly, my uncle said arrogantly, "My daughter is the eldest daughter, and she is different from your daughter." I understood, and I was not worthy of my sister. My dad poked a sip of wine and his little eyes floated to my mom. My mother immediately stood up and said, "It's because I haven't been home for too long and I don't understand the rules of my hometown. Logically speaking, I'm just a wife from the second wife and I can't sit with my elder brother's family. You eat, my daughter and I will wait for everyone outside." My mother said and left the seat. "You are a coward who is obedient." My uncle was very satisfied with my mother's behavior and commented on my mother's back, "Although my brother and sister are not good at stomachs, they still have a hint of a hint." My father stopped holding the chopsticks for a second, and he put down the chopsticks. He picked up the wine glass. "I won't talk about them anymore, my elder brother drinks." I was almost furious. They repeatedly urged us to go back to our hometown for the new year. When we got home, we didn't drink a sip of hot water and we were pulled over to treat us. As a result, the food was not eaten, and our family of 4 was driven away. All 3 of us were anxious. My neck came to me, and my mother looked completely useless. My mother glanced at me and said, "This little thing is worth being angry? I can't practice it." She waved her hand and called the waiter. "I'll send all the dishes ordered in this box to a small room, but whoever takes any plate of them will take the dishes were served on the big table inside, and I can guarantee that I can get out of here within 3 days." This box was set by my mother, and the deposit was given by my mother. My mother is still a high-end VIP of this chain hotel. Who can afford to offend? Who can't afford to offend? The waiters immediately set up a small table for us, and the dishes were served up, filling the small table with a lot of food. "Why are you still standing there? Eat this day of the new year." My mother pointed at me and added lightly, "Don't worry, your dad has done it since the moment your uncle asked you two to get off the table." Very hungry and ready. For an hour, my sister and I had a big meal in the small room. My father was having a social gathering in the big room. From time to time, he burst into laughter, but no one came out to urge the food. An hour later, my sister and I were full, but my mother didn't let us quit. Don't worry, step on the halftime and act for me for a while. After a while, the people in the big box finally couldn't help it. I can't eat anything, so I'm hungry. My aunt came out to urge me. As soon as the food was on, the box was facing the three of us who were burping. My aunt was distorted and she said sarcastically, "Oh, brother and sister are good methods. If you keep the whole family hungry, you three will eat it first." My mother made lipstick and quickly stood up. "Sister-in-law, my sister is innocent. I'm making so many jokes when I see Tiana making. I'm afraid of making mistakes in this reunion dinner, so I quickly thought about letting these two girls try the dishes first. It's not good, change the food quickly. Sister-in-law, don't worry, you'll finish it. When the dishes here are served, the dishes in the private room will be served." My mother said the hardest words in the softest tone, and the meaning is very obvious. My daughter has finished eating, and you are worthy of eating. The eldest aunt was so angry that she trembled all over. She threw the door and entered the private room. She patted the table in front of my father and got angry. "Second brother, what do you mean? My eldest brother's family didn't have a meal, your three people ate the meal first. Don't you have any intention of respecting your elders? At the beginning, I said that your wife is not a good one." Sure enough, the man at home didn't have a meal and opened a small meal by himself. This kind of woman can't be wanted at all. My dad reacted a little slower, and he looked a little honest. "Sister-in-law, do you still eat this food?" The aunt was choked. The cousin's mentor answered, "How can you not eat it? It's been so late. The food here is not cheap. I usually can't bear to come and eat it for several years. Mom, please calm down. Second uncle, my mother has long hair and short knowledge, so don't be as knowledgeable as him. The cousin Luodashi, uncle, the eldest son is almost 30 years old this year. He doesn't do anything and is dependent on his parents at home. Don't look at his words now, he seems to be quite reasonable. When uncle asked one by one before today, he didn't even let go of his fart. 1. My dad smiled, as if he didn't care at all. Dashi said, "Yes, how can I not eat the New Year's reunion dinner? In this way, I will drive those three people back now. Don't spare everyone's interest. I will add 2 more hard dishes to the table. Brother sister-in-law, don't be angry." After saying that, my dad got up and staggered to push the door out. "What's wrong with you three? Let's go home and see how I deal with you." My dad took the three of us out of the restaurant cursingly. As soon as I went out, my staggering steps were instantly corrected, my drunkenness disappeared, and my speaking was normal. My mother opened the car door and laughed, "Pretty. Is the money for the meal settled?" My dad sat in the passenger seat and raised his head to fill a bottle of mineral water. My mother ate the table, "They're not as nothing. I asked me to treat you, but I didn't let my daughter go to the table, I didn't lift the table on the spot. It's all for the sake of a mother." My mother smiled and said lightly, "Today, this matter is at most awesome. I must have something else to do later." "Please, what are you going to do?" My dad sneered, and the cold meaning of the usual business world was brought out. "Isn't that a little bit of it after tossing and turning? I can't use the things from my hometown. I gave it up a few years ago and said I still want to go out of my hands. If you deduct something else, I will let them see what a cruel person is." My mother, "It's so weird. They are all family members. They are not easy to do ugly things. I think they would do a good job in advance and let their eldest nephew owes debts. If they pick up the house, they ask others to take over their old house." My sister and I were stunned. My mom also told my dad, "He really killed people without bringing shoes, okay?" My mother sneered and drove, "You two remember that the world is great and the world is the biggest of our family. If you make my children uncomfortable, I will make their whole family uncomfortable." My mom guessed it well. There was no phone call that night, but early the next morning, my dad's phone was blown up. The uncle called in person, his tone was extremely peaceful. "There is only one thing in the village, and it is not allowed to be rejected: worshipping ancestors. Worshipping ancestors is a pretext, and crying is the purpose." My mother permed her hair and put on her coat. "Are you ready? Let me learn how to tear down the best relatives today." When the car drove to the entrance of the village, my dad stopped the car and said he was taking our family to wish the village party secretary a new year. Before I could finish a cigarette, my dad mentioned the matter of building roads for the village in a roundabout way. "Uncle, sure, after the new year, I plan to build a factory nearby and build the roads in the village." The village party secretary was washing coals and said, "The country also built roads before, but our village was remote. The road was gone when it was built to the entrance of the village. It looked neat, but it was cloudy and rainy, and the village was muddy. The road requires money, so where can I get money to repair it in the village? My dad took the initiative to pay for the road construction, which is a great thing. The village party secretary immediately asked my dad to come in and talk in detail. My dad refused and wanted to go and work with his elder brother to worship his ancestors. I will talk to you about this after that. The village party secretary patted my dad on the shoulder and said, "One word is certain." When I got out and got in the car, the question I kept in my heart finally asked, "Dad, isn't the on-site road construction planned 3 years later? Why did you mention it now?" My mother smiled and said, "This is digging a hole for your good uncle. I haven't figured out what the pit is going on. My uncle's family has arrived. According to the rules of my hometown, girls cannot participate in the worship of ancestors, but the third daughter-in-law can. So my sister and my uncle's 2 daughters were left at home. Before leaving, my mother left me with a sharp look, "Be smart." As soon as they left, the 2 daughters of the uncle's family yelled to find a kid from the same village to play with them, and left us and ran away. My sister and I were staring at each other in the yard. At this time, I realized something was wrong. The village was empty yard, 2 girls who came from other places. If something happened, it would be too unsurprising. I immediately sent a message to my mother, and my mother replied in seconds, "The west side of the village entrance." I pulled my sister up and ran out. Wherever there were many ants, I went. I bought a few large bags of melon seeds in a small supermarket, and spread them apart to the crowd, smiling. The older ones called aunt, and the younger ones called sister. Regardless of whether the seniority is right, they will be in the crowd in a while. Someone who looks familiar asked me, "Are you the eldest daughter of the second son of the Luo family?" I nodded, grabbed a handful of melon seeds and stuffed them into the other party's hand, and said sweetly, "Hello, auntie." The aunt who didn't know her surname pulled me closer and said in a low voice, "Your uncle is cheating you. Why do you dare to come?" I pretended to be confused and ignorant. "How is that possible?" "That's my uncle, how could he cheat me?" My aunt rolled her eyes and was about to turn to the sky. "I used to be a kiss, but since your father became rich, the kiss has become enemies. You have no son, and your uncle is waiting to eat your family." A group of people responded, "This is saying that urging you to come back this year is because you are interested in your family's money." The other said that the eldest uncle didn't sleep after he came back last night and scolded the yard until midnight. In the lively and bustle, 2 young men turned into my uncle's house. My aunt raised her voice and greeted her, "Don't go in, people are here." My aunt gently pulled my sister and I, "Aren't you here to see people?" "People are here, in front of us, just look at each other." Check out blind dates? I was struck by lightning in an instant. We made mental preparations before we came, but we were just crying and talking, but we never expected. My uncle's family is so greedy that they actually found 2 people to marry me and my sister. The 2 men came over with shamelessness. In front of all the aunts, he dared to speak shamelessly, "I am your aunt's nephew. Your aunt said that you marry your sisters and marry them together, and they will be a family in the future. I will first agree that your mother has given birth to 2 daughters. I heard that this will be inherited. After you can't give birth to a son, you will have to leave the house in vain. As the saying goes, barefoot is not afraid of those who wear shoes, and shameless is not afraid of those who want face." This kind of eating, picking, and looking cheap has really refreshed my and my sister's knowledge. I said angrily, "Born your ancestor." My sister jumped up and was about to hit someone. My aunt grabbed my sister and said, "How can I hit people and every girl?" While scolding us, she took off her cotton shoes and threw them at the 2 men. Fighting is something that depends on our elders. For a moment, the old men and mothers who had just knocked the melon seeds took action one after another. Some used the trick of fanning people with soles of shoes, some hit people with brooms, and some grabbed a handful of soil and prepared to attack them at any time. But the 2 boys didn't do anything, bent their knees around, just watching. Whoever dared to fight back would hit the man's hand with a stick. A group of little girls surrounded me and my sister and protected me in the middle. They said, "Don't worry, if we are here, there is no way to bully you." In the midst of noisy, the ancestor worshippers came back. My mother rushed over and first checked whether my sister and I were injured. After finding that they were intact, she handed my dad a look from a distance. My dad said, "What's going on?" A group of people explained the causes and consequences clearly, and my aunt finally added, "My family eats her own family, she is a huge family. I, Chi Chunhua, have seen me for the first time, and I really lost all my face for 8 lifetimes." She bowed with the words to the 2 men. The last spit was aimed at my uncle. The uncle's face suddenly turned red and the uncle was angry and shouted, "This is the business of our Luo family. Why are you talking too much?" Second brother, you say yourself, I kindly found someone who knows the truth for your two daughters, and you are the same disagree? My dad showed that honest expression again, agree. He nodded, this is a good thing to kiss more, thank you sister-in-law for worrying. The uncle became proud again at that time. But my dad scratched his head again, looking at a loss, our family can't afford the dowry of these two girls, so don't dislike me. The two blind date men were about to pop out their eyes, how is it possible? Your 3 factories and 2 companies still have several houses, how can you not afford a dowry? My mother smiled softly, there are so many, but these things are passed on to Luodashi. What qualifications are there for the 2 girls? As soon as my mother said this, the whole audience was silent. The uncle's eyes shiny, but the uncle couldn't do anything about it. This answer is amazing. The reason why he sent his 2 nephews to go on a blind date was because he knew that my parents loved their daughter. The huge family property of the 2 girls would marry their nephews again, but in the end they were not all from their parents' home? Who knew that my second brother's family loved his daughter and favored boys over girls was even more amazing than him, so they really didn't give it to their uncle. The aunt couldn't believe it. My mother said for granted, what are the differences between girls? Our family has no son, and the family property will be Luodashi from now on. Sister-in-law, don't you want Dashi to ask? The eldest uncle asked speechlessly in one sentence. On one side is the biological son and on the other side is the biological nephew. Of course, it is more important to be the son. Since the son wants to inherit all the property of the second wife, the nephew of the mother's family will be useless. The aunt sent the 2 people away. The 2 fellow villagers were unhappy and came from afar, with no good looks and even being beaten for nothing. Who would be willing to do this? When I was yelling to pay for it. My aunt said, what money is it? You guys fell it yourself. She pointed to the camera in the small supermarket next to her, what are you saying like this? The supermarket owner showed up, the surveillance camera is broken, get out. The 2 folk men left, but didn't get out completely. They went back and called their families, and rushed to the uncle's house in a fierce manner, asking the uncle to give him an explanation. The man was found by the eldest uncle, and he said that he had many benefits, but he didn't get the benefits. He took a beat and was driven away. He asked the uncle, I won't give you an explanation today. Should my parents' family still have to interact in the future? The uncle also got up. His son was about to inherit his wealth. How could he look down on these 2 poor relatives? The uncle waved his hand and said, get out. If you make a fuss, I will divorce my uncle. I will find another young and beautiful person next year. You guys will stay wherever you are. Before the 2 rooms understood, the village party secretary came in and said, my second boy, let's talk about road construction. My dad smiled with a simple face, but was embarrassed, Uncle, I can't make the decision on this matter anymore. Now it's my elder brother who makes the decision. The village party secretary was confused, you pay for the road construction, how can you let the elder brother make the decision? My dad smiled and explained, that's right. He said he wanted to inherit my property. I can't make the decision on the money in the future. After that, my dad shut up and stood obediently in the corner with my mom. He looks well behaved as if whatever you say is, I'll listen to it. Although the village party secretary was confused, building roads was a big deal, and he didn't want to give up, so he asked his uncle, boss of Luo family, the money for road construction. When my uncle heard the money, he stood up in pain and his nostrils were facing the sky. What road construction? What money? I don't have money. When I get my second brother's property, our family will move to the city to live. What's the road in the village with me? Relation? As soon as these words were said, the village party secretary was stunned. The elders who were preparing to discuss the details were also stunned. My uncle's attitude is so bad, this is not okay. So, a group of clan elders also joined the noisy uncle's family. In the small yard, several forces, relatives and men want to speak, the eldest uncle shouted, the clan elder and the village party secretary urged the road to build. For a moment, the noise was loud and the whole village could hear it. At this messy stall, my mother waved her hand and signaled us, car, factory, it's ready. She became angry and picked up. Don't you want my property? Take off the skin first. When we get in the car and leave. My dad's down jacket is still straight. My mom's makeup is still exquisite. Not only are they unscathed. I didn't even say a few words, and I looked leisurely. It's not like a chaotic war. And it's like just going for a walk. My mother concluded. This is called borrowing force to fight force. As for letting my uncle inherit his family property. Is there any certificate for this matter? Are there any documents? It's no point to say it. Baozi, you have to come up with evidence. Just after the 7th day of the lunar month, my uncle and his family brought their families into the city. There is no way, the village really can't stay. After the aunt's parents' home learned that she was being played like a monkey, he ordered to cut off relations with his aunt. I have not found any accurate information when I have built the road in the yard several times. In anger, he broke the matter open. Everyone in the village knows it. The Luo family's father is a stingy person. Not only my brother's family. It also ruined the major event of road construction. Since then, my uncle's family has been blocked and scolded when they go out. He was scolded by his neighbors at home. If you leave the village and relax, go home. Baojuan found that there was a pile of messy garbage in the yard. In this way, my uncle's family finally couldn't stand it anymore. Pack your luggage and go to the city to find my dad, so as to discuss the inheritance of the family property. Are you still worried about not having a place to live when you get the money? My uncle's family doesn't know our address, but know the company's address. Early in the morning of the 7th day of the lunar month, the whole family squatted at the company's door. My dad comes to work. My mother was prepared for this. Instead of showing up, he asked the smartest secretary in the company to deal with it. No one else has to worry about it, he only cares about Luo Dashi. The secretary my mother mentioned was named Zhang Ling, who was young and beautiful, and had a lively mind. She quickly understood what my mother meant, and put on makeup in front of the mirror, and went there with her high heels. She didn't look for anyone else, but only looked for her uncle. You are Mr. Luo, are you? Zhang Ling said as soon as she opened her mouth. Luo Dashi's heart was beating. No one had called him that since he was a child, and the person who called him was still a beautiful girl. He stood up excitedly. Zhang Ling smiled sweetly. Mr. Luo has given instructions long ago. Mr. Luo, you are the future successor of the company and you have to receive it well. The hotel has been arranged. Mr. Luo, please follow me. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Luo Dashi was a little embarrassed. I still have so many people. Zhang Ling was surprised as if she had just seen the people behind him. Sorry, I thought only Mr. Luo came and didn't prepare so many rooms. Otherwise, you can wait a little longer and I'll ask Mr. Luo what happened. Arrange. The company has a lot of meetings at the beginning of the year, and it's probably going to be dark. The uncle's face turned dark and he snorted coldly. It's not so good. Is there anyone who throws his elders on the street like this? Zhang Ling shrank, her eyes turned red as soon as she said it was red, and she pulled Luo Dashi's sleeve to apologize. I'm sorry, I didn't expect that Mr. Luo's family would come with me. Who is the heir who brought his family to join me? Although Zhang Ling's method of acting coquettishly and taking eye drops was low level, Luo Dashi was very helpful. He didn't want to make noise at the company's door, it was like that. I'll go to the hotel to settle it first. You can find a guest house for one night. I will pay attention to you when I discuss the inheritance with my second uncle. He said this, turned his head and urged Zhang Ling to leave. Zhang Ling followed him and praised shyly, I am worthy of being Mr. Luo, but I have courage. Luo Dashi heard this and floated all over the clouds. This is called sugar-coated shells, which are also sweet words that men often use. My mother pointed at the surveillance and educated me. You have just graduated this year. You must distinguish your own strength and what others say about you. The person who is coaxed away after just a few good words is a fool. I nodded repeatedly to say yes. After educating me, my mother asked the finance department to add bonuses to Zhang Ling this month, and finally asked my dad, have you considered it? My dad was silent in a rare way. I sat in the chair and felt a little depressed. My mother ignored me and just waited quietly. After a long time, my dad raised his head and his eyes were a little red. Give him another chance, the last time. My mother sighed, they are greedy and don't understand after hitting them again and again. They are still trying harder. I'm afraid that trying again will hurt your heart. My dad finished smoking a cigarette silently. The blood is connected, why is this? It's the last time. In the evening, my mother arranged a large private room to welcome my uncle's family. There was a precedent of starving at the beginning of the year. This time, my uncle shut up obediently and never mentioned asking me and my sister to leave the table. My uncle wanted to get angry because he broke up with his parents' family. He had been so angry that he had nowhere to vent his anger these days. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, Luo Dashi stared coldly. But let you all have a lot of things to say. Don't think it clearly in your heart, don't give me too much trouble. The aunt shut up in disappointment. My mother looked at her nose and nose until the dishes were almost served, and my uncle finally couldn't help it. Second brother, what are you planning to let Dajin inherit? When my dad heard this, he smiled and changed into a cold face that seemed to be a smile, and asked back, brother, what does it mean? The uncle pondered for a moment and looked humble. I didn't have to be so anxious. This is not the stubborn group of people in my hometown. I really can't live together, otherwise you can take out a house to give it to the main Jin Zhu, and let our family have a place to settle down. Anyway, this house will be a big gold sooner or later. After the uncle said that, the aunt added, what's wrong? My second brother's family has always been generous. Sooner or later, the property belongs to the big gold. Now it's hard to just give one house. It's not embarrassing to say it. My dad lowered his head and drank, pretending to be mute. My mom chuckled. The aunt was angry when she heard the sound. What? Want to regret it? You said in front of the whole village that Dajin was going to inherit the family property. When it was time to pay for the goods, how could you push it? My mother smiled and was not angry at all. Sister-in-law, why are you anxious? You have no place to live, so we will find a place for you, so naturally there is no reason to let your family live in a bridge cave. You guys, put your heart in your stomach. The aunt was anxious. Is this a matter of not being able to live in a bridge hole? How many major ghost houses can't afford to live in? The key is to give the property to your family. Is this second brother a fool? The uncle knocked on the table and raised his neck to ask my dad Luo Yuanshan. What are you planning? Okay, Daming has called it out. My dad put down his wine glass and replied meaningfully, let Dajin inherit his family property. At least I have to wait for me to die? There was a silence on the table, and the uncle and uncle's eyes were dim and uncle's eyes were unclear. My dad laughed again. I'll eat, I'll have the strength to settle the score after I'm full. The table of tables was left unresolved. Luo Dashi, one of the protagonists in the whole scene, was in a state of mind. Not only did he say a word, but when the show ended, he also rushed out of the box first, turned to a corner of the corridor, and grabbed the standing outside Zhang Ling's hand. At the beginning of the conversation, Zhang Ling poked out her hand and interrupted Luo Dashi's words. This is amazing. Zhang Ling glanced at my dad, and drew circles on Luo Dashi's chest. Mr. Luo, I'm so surprised. Now he is not yours. Zhang Ling patted Luo Dashi's clothes on her chest, chuckled, and turned around and walked behind my mother. I've been quiet for 3 days since then. My dad was a little anxious these 3 days, and it was directly reflected that he smoked more frequently. My mother's evaluation of this is, your dad has too high expectations for his brother. I understand in my heart that it is not too high, it is just the most basic requirement for people, but my uncle's family cannot do it at all. Even though my dad knows this, I still look forward to my uncle's family still having a hint of family affection for him. This expectation broke in a phone call 3 days later. Mr. Luo, your black Audi brake pad is passive. Zhang Ling reported calmly, which was particularly cold in my father's ears. That black Audi was left to Luo Dashi by my dad. My dad finished smoking a cigarette in silence and crushed the cigarette butts. I gave them the opportunity. Don't, then there is no need to be sympathetic. My mom immediately arranged for Zhang Lin to drive the spare car out. In the afternoon, Luo Dashi called in. My mother's voice was full of enthusiasm. Second uncle, I found a fun place and take you out for a walk. Let both of my sisters come. It's rare for me to come to visit my second uncle, so the whole family must come. Luo Dashi said the 4 words the whole family is here particularly clearly. Luo Dashi insisted not let my dad drive. He drove the black Audi to pick up our family of 4 and drove all the way to the winding highway. When the car drove to the top of the mountain, nothing unexpected happened. He received an emergency call and said to my dad with a look of anxiety, second uncle, my mom went shopping in the city and got lost. I have to go find it quickly. Leave the car for you, you guys play slowly, I'll take a taxi back. He was about to leave after he said that, but my father slapped him on the shoulder and couldn't move. 6 strong security guards got out of the car next to them and stood up straight behind Luo Dashi. Don't be anxious, my eldest nephew. My dad smiled and his smile was a little cold. It's such an urgent matter, let's go back and help you. Luo Dashi glanced at the black Audi, and the cold sweat fell on his forehead. It's easy to go up the mountain by pressing the brake pads, but going down the mountain. Isn't that asking for death? He subconsciously wanted to make a phone call, but before he could take out his cell phone, he was held down by the security guard. He turned his head and saw a row of fierce people. What else does his dad misunderstand? Second uncle, please listen to my explanation. My dad said slowly, big nephew, it's too late. I've given you a chance, but in return you're going to kill our whole family. Think about how to explain, I'm sorry, do you think about it? Several security guards held Luo down. He was overjoyed and pushed him into the driver's seat of the Audi car. My dad's voice was calm, big nephew, I have specially maintained this car for you before, and the car is in good condition. I will forgive you when I drive this car from here to the bottom of the mountain. Luodashi was so scared that he almost cried. Run from here to the foot of the mountain. Where can I still have life? Didn't the second uncle know what he did? Why did he still need to drive down the mountain? Did the second uncle want him to die? Luodashi never thought my dad was so scary, nor did he think the steering wheel was so hot. Second uncle, please spare me. Luodashi wanted to escape, but the security guard held him tightly. My dad lit a cigarette and looked cold, give you a little bit of a look. Do you think I'm easy to bully? If you don't drive this car today, I'll find someone to drive it. In short, you're settled today. The security guards quickly moved Luodashi to the co-pilot. One of the security guards sat in the cab, tied up his seatbelt, and without saying a word of nonsense, he kicked the accelerator down the mountain. Luodashi was frightened and he collapsed and shouted, "Don't drive. Don't drive. The brake pads of this car were broken. If you run like this, we will fall off the cliff." The security guard who drove seemed deaf and turned a deaf ear to his ears. He drove rapidly on the winding mountain road and even drove a few drifts. Half an hour later, we also arrived at the foot of the mountain. At this time, Luodashi had already crawled out of the car and sat on the curb, tears flowing down his chest and his pants were wet. My dad sneered, "You dare to attack me with just this courage?" In fact, the car he drove out today is a good car, and the passive Audi car had been driven back and sealed by Zhang Ling overnight. Luodashi, this idiot, didn't even know that the license plate number had changed. Because of the evil he did himself, he lived on the boundary between life and death all day today. My dad approached him and asked, "Big nephew, did you choose to surrender or do you have another move with your second uncle?" Luodashi was taken away by the police. He even took the initiative to get into the police car, for fear that my father would drag him back to fight after a step slower. Too ruthless, too ruthless. This day he lived longer than half of his life because he explained it very readily. Before night, the uncle and uncle were taken away by the police. But the interrogation process was not smooth. My uncle yelled in the interrogation room all day long to see my father, otherwise it would be impossible to say a word. In fact, the consequences of his or her explanations are nothing. The passive car is still there, and Luodashi's behavior is also recorded, and even witnesses are witnesses in their conspiracy. In any case, they cannot remove this crime. But my dad thought about it and brought some delicious food to visit his uncle. A small table with 4 simple side dishes. I couldn't drink, so my dad opened a bottle of mineral water. Dad sure didn't say a word in front of his uncle and had a drink first. The uncle sneered, "Who did you show this way to? You sent your elder brother to prison, you have no conscience." My dad put down his cup and sneered, "Brother, do you want my whole family to live, and you still have to tell me your conscience? Okay, then I'll talk to you about your conscience." My dad pointed to the 4 side dishes and said, "When I was a child, my family was poor, let alone eating vegetables, I didn't have any money to go to school. You said you were the eldest son and wanted to go to high school, so I dropped out of junior high school and gave you the savings to you. You said that living expenses were too little and I was hungry at school. I went to the construction site to carry steel bars at the age of 15, and all the money I earned was given to my family. Later I opened a factory and lived a better life. You said that your family was poor and made me feel like I was to help. I will give you a factory, which will ruin you for 2 years." My dad raised his head and looked straight at his uncle. "What about you? Brother, what have you given me? You gave my wife and daughter humiliation, plotting on my daughter's marriage, and you still want my whole family's life." The uncle slammed the table and furiously, "If you don't have a son, your property will eventually become outsiders. This is natural. If you hand it over, won't there be so many troubles?" My dad looked sarcastic, "Forget it. Well, my dad is not capable and can only plot against other people. Even if you give your property, can you take it? If you have 2 tails of meat under your crotch, you will think you or my son is cheating, right?" The flesh on my uncle's face was trembling. After a while, he was depressed. "I don't want your family property anymore. Write a letter of understanding and let us go out. I just pretend that this has never happened. Otherwise," the uncle changed his tone, "when I go out, I will dig up our mother's grave." After a moment of silence, my dad lifted the table, grabbed my uncle's collar, and fisted him. "Okay, you dig the grave, I'll bury you alive." My dad pressed his uncle's bloody face with his expression on his face. With a fierce look, I will do what I say. My mother was not idle either, she went to visit her uncle. Unlike the style of the uncle was talking sadly, and scolding my mother while pretending to be pitiful and begging for letting go. My mother didn't have the heart to pretend to be decent. 1 meter away, listening to the uncle's nagging, slowly applying her nails, and from time to time, she even looked up and cared about whether her sister-in-law was thirsty. I'll open a bottle of water for you. The eldest uncle couldn't help it and cried, brother and sister, we can't blame us all. I really didn't plan to do this at the beginning. I originally wanted to marry your 2 daughters and kiss you when the time comes. How great is the family? But you don't appreciate it. You have to take half of the responsibility for the current situation. My mother blew her nails and said, did you say that I promised the 2 blind dates for my daughter at the beginning? We are still a family that loves each other? The eldest uncle nodded, yes, yes. My mother slapped the eldest uncle in the face, your mother's nonsense. Why should my daughter make you drink? Are you worthy? But the situation is different now. My mother smiled sweetly, now your 2 daughters are in my hands. After saying this, my mother turned around and left, leaving only the eldest uncle howl in horror. What do you want to do? What do you want to do to my daughter? What to do? Do nothing. As early as the day the police arrested people, my mother paid a living expenses to her 2 cousins. How old are you? The big one is 26, the little one is 24. You are not the one who sent someone. As for the fact that you deliberately left our daughter alone in your hometown, I don't plan to care about it. Your father. My mother is like this, and she will only treat you as a burden after she comes out, and she will consider it more for herself in the future. After explaining this, my mother sent away their job transfer certificate and ticket. My mother said that simply to scare herself. The days of jail are so long, you have to find something to pass the time, right? After 2 conversations, my parents were criticized separately for the incident of taking action in the police station. When my sister and I rushed to the police station to get people, my dad swept away the haze a few days ago and became much more energetic. Tomorrow we will go back to our hometown and we will make a special trip to the village party secretary's house to apologize. Because of the conflict with our uncle, the village party secretary was fooled and worked in vain. After hearing the whole story, the village party secretary sighed, people's hearts are not enough, they are all greedy. My dad promised to do what he said about road construction and started construction at the end of the year, and he would take all the expenses. The village party secretary was overjoyed when he heard this and threw away the previous unhappiness behind his mind. In order to prevent any mistakes, my dad was directly locked in the living room and had tea and chat. The son and daughter called out to people all over the village and decided on the same day. My mother took my sister and I to prepare a generous gift and made a special trip to visit Aunt Chi's house to thank him for his protection. At the end, my dad chose a zodiac auspicious day and visited the grave for his grandparents. You said you always talk about raising children to prevent old age, passing on the family line, and raising a son who holds you 2 graves. Are you satisfied? My father complained a few times and asked someone to start moving the grave. He picked 2 good cemeteries in the city and moved his grandparents to the city. My mom rolled my dad. I talk more ruthlessly than anyone else, but I do things more timidly than anyone else. My dad said happily, that's about momentum. How could I get myself in for a scum? Wife, don't worry. My uncle's family's verdict came in spring. Luodashi sentenced him to 3 years in prison, and his uncle and uncle each year. There are not many verdicts, but in my hometown, people who come out of prison will probably not have a good life. Moreover, the 2 cousins have already gone far away, and Luodashi is left, who doesn't do anything. I hope they can live for a long time and make more money for their son who is dependent on their parents. The whole text is over. Wipe the table and don't feel dirty. Why do I get dirty with sanitary napkins when I have menstruation?